In the year 1863, Peter is employed as a slave on a cotton plantation alongside his wife, Dodian, and their children. Upon discovering that he has been sold to a new owner, Peter spends his final moments with his family in heartfelt prayer before white men forcefully separate him from his loved ones. Despite the desperate cries of his children, Peter is dragged away. In a courageous attempt to resist, Peter yells and struggles against his captors, but when they threaten his wife with a gun, he immediately ceases his defiance. Reluctantly, Peter agrees to board the cart on his own accord. However, his captors, seeking revenge for his resistance, strike him before hauling him away once more. Peter, along with numerous other slaves, is transported in a cage resembling those used for livestock. Through the confining bars, he vows to his tearful children that he will return for them someday as they chase after the cart in despair. After a long and grueling journey, they finally arrive at their new workplace, the construction site of a railroad. The conditions are significantly worse than those on the plantation. The severed heads of rebellious slaves serve as a gruesome warning at the entrance. Slaves are forced to sleep in cages, and the white masters frequently abuse and insult them, even when they are compliant and hardworking. To justify their heinous actions, the masters quote the Bible. Moreover, numerous wild dogs patrol the area, ready to be unleashed on any slave who dares to flee. Punishments for misbehavior range from whipping to execution in the open field or facial branding by the merciless boss Fassel. Fassel is assisted by two men, Harrington and Knowles, the latter of whom was also a slave but was chosen to become a guard due to his exceptional hunting skills. Peter tries his best to conform to the rules, but when he attempts to help his friend Gordon after a fall, he is reprimanded for daring to do anything other than work. One evening, the slaves are forced to witness the agonizing pain of a fellow slave named John, who has been branded on his cheek. A terrified slave named Thomas trembles in fear, and Peter offers him comfort by encouraging him to remember his loved ones and to think of their situation as merely work. He also speaks of God's watchful eye, but John scoffs at the idea of a caring God. Unfazed, Peter remains composed and promises to pray for John. Later on, Peter overhears two white guards discussing important news. President Lincoln has emancipated the slaves, and those who manage to escape are seeking refuge in Baton Rouge. The conversation is abruptly interrupted when a guard notices Thomas' mistake with the food and prepares to punish him. However, Peter intervenes on Thomas' behalf, explaining that he is just a child. The guard strikes Peter and threatens him with a gun, but Fassel intervenes, having taken a particular interest in Peter's demeanor. When Peter returns to the cage, Fassel informs him that Peter is now his dog, to which Peter cleverly responds by requesting to be fed the same food as the dogs. Fassel laughs but later chains Peter and forces him to kneel in front of him, while his dog snarls and barks at Peter, committing his scent to memory. Over lunch, Peter informs the other slaves of Lincoln's decree in Baton Rouge, which they could reach after a 5-day journey through the swamp. Although some slaves are hesitant due to the dangerous swamp, Peter convinces a few to join him when he reminds them of the perilous conditions at their current location. They now await the opportune moment to escape. Sometime later, a slave dies during work, and Peter is ordered to drag the body to the pit where all corpses are discarded. Some white deserters should be digging the pit, but upon seeing Peter, they argue that a black man should perform the task. Consequently, Peter finds himself wielding a shovel to fill the pit. He recognizes this as an ideal opportunity to execute his escape plan. Patiently, he waits for the guards to be distracted by an explosion on the field before seizing the chance to attack them with the shovel and steal a knife, making a run for it. Witnessing Peter's actions, other slaves and deserters take advantage of the confusion to flee as well, managing to overpower some guards in the process. John even manages to steal a gun. As the alarm is raised, guards begin to fire at the escaping slaves, killing many before they disappear into the woods. Fassel shoots the deserters himself, but he is infuriated by Peter's successful escape. He orders Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to pursue Peter and his companions. Peter successfully reunites with 3 of his friends in the forest, and they rely on his keen senses to guide them through the treacherous terrain. Eventually, they reach the swamps, where most of the group manages to navigate the dangers with relative ease. However, Thomas becomes paralyzed with fear upon seeing the crocodiles, which allows the pursuing dogs to catch up with him. After the dogs inflict significant damage, Fassel calls them off and demands to know the group's destination. Thomas refuses to answer, prompting Fassel to offer a deal. If Thomas reveals the location of the others, he will be allowed to leave. Terrified, Thomas divulges what he knows and is granted permission to enter the swamp. However, as soon as he turns his back, Fassel shoots him, leaving his body for the crocodiles to devour. Meanwhile, Peter, John, and Gordon successfully navigate the treacherous swamp. Peter suggests they traverse the other swamps to throw off their pursuers, but John, refusing to take orders and confident in the protection afforded by his stolen gun, opts for the horse trail instead. Gordon wants to follow Peter, but Peter believes splitting up will make them harder to track. After Peter advises him to follow the sound of Lincoln's cannons, Gordon chooses his own path through the woods. As Peter forges his own way, he discovers that he has been grazed by a bullet, causing his leg to bleed. Knowing he must act quickly to prevent the blood from attracting the dogs, Peter first puts some distance between himself and Fassel. Soon he stumbles upon a white family's house, where slaves are also kept. Peter fashions a tourniquet from a vine to stem the bleeding and stealthily approaches the house, hiding behind a pile of logs. He manages to pump some water and spots clothes hanging on a line. Risking capture, Peter dashes across the garden to steal a shirt before disappearing into the forest. However, a child from the family spots him and sounds an alarm by ringing a bell. Fassel hears the commotion and follows it to the house, where the family informs him of the direction Peter took. Peter runs as fast as he can, pausing only to bandage his wound with the stolen shirt. He then removes the blood-stained shirt and hides it in a trunk for the dogs to find, while he conceals himself beneath the swamp water. Fassel and his men fall for the ruse and continue down the road, believing Peter crossed the swamp. Once they are gone, Peter emerges, only to be attacked by a crocodile. He fends off the creature with a thick branch before killing it with his knife. At that moment, Dodiane wakes from a nightmare in which her husband was in danger. Her children, also awakened, express their concerns for their father, but Dodiane reassures them, promising that he is alive and will return soon, as he has survived situations that no other man could endure. As night falls, Peter hides in a tree, using his knife to remove leeches from his body, inadvertently dripping blood on the surrounding plants. Meanwhile, Fassel and his men discover the dead crocodile, its empty stomach confirming Peter's escape. They decide to camp for the night and feast on the crocodile meat. Harrington compliments Peter's resourcefulness, but Fassel scolds him, sharing a lesson his father taught him about not giving black people an inch, lest they take more, including jobs and land. The next morning, Peter resumes his journey, covering his body with mud and animal excrement to mask his scent, despite the constant presence of flies. As he crosses another swamp, he prays for the strength to overcome his fear of the creatures lurking within. When sunlight suddenly breaks through the clouds, he takes it as a divine sign. As Fassel divides his group to cover more ground, Peter is fortunate to find an abandoned treehouse with clean water, leftover food, and hot coals. Using the coals, he cauterizes his leg wound before repurposing them to smoke a beehive, scaring away the bees and allowing him to collect honey. Fassel spots the smoke and gives chase, but Peter is already on the move. The treehouse also has a boat, which a snake has claimed as its hiding spot. Carefully, Peter uses a branch to evict the snake before boarding the boat and sailing away, savoring the taste of the honey. Meanwhile, Dodiane is informed by her master that she has been sold and will be leaving in 2 days. Her children are not permitted to accompany her, as her new master intends for her to have a new husband. Distraught by the news and determined to wait for her husband's return, Dodiane makes a drastic decision to avoid being sold. She feigns an accident by placing her hand inside a cotton processing machine. Back with Fassel, he discovers the treehouse thanks to his dog's keen sense of smell, and continues to track Peter's path across the river. Peter hastily makes his way into the woods, where he unexpectedly reunites with John. John is furious, fearing that Peter's pursuers will now come after him as well. Peter insists he is not being followed and tries to teach John how to conceal his scent, but John disregards his advice, and they continue running. Moments later, they hear the dogs barking and quickly seek cover. Peter hides in an empty tree trunk, while John climbs to the top of a tree. However, the dogs manage to trace John's scent, allowing Fassel and his men to easily locate him. John refuses to descend from the tree, so Fassel forces him down with a gunshot. Fassel then attempts to extract information about Peter through violent means, but John remains steadfastly silent. Deciding to make an example of John, Fassel orders Harrington and Knowles to carry John's severed head back to camp as a warning. Peter closes his eyes, avoiding the sight of his friend's demise, and offers a prayer for John's soul. After waiting several hours to create distance between himself and Fassel, Peter emerges from the tree trunk when rain begins to fall. He is horrified to discover the brutal manner in which John was killed. Despite the weight of grief on his mind, Peter forces himself to keep moving. Suddenly, he sees a group of horses galloping past, one of which is ablaze. Peter follows the direction from which they came and discovers a plantation house engulfed in flames. All the white inhabitants are dead, suggesting that the slaves had heard about Lincoln's decree and decided to take matters into their own hands. With his knife at the ready, Peter cautiously enters the burning house and explores the rooms. He stumbles upon the dining table and, unable to resist, gorges himself on the food and wine to nourish his exhausted body. He doesn't stop until he hears an odd sound from upstairs. Following the noise, Peter finds a dying girl pinned beneath a harp that she continues to play as a cry for help. He swiftly rescues her and carries her outside, where he places her on a table and attempts to fetch water. The frightened girl makes Peter stay by her side and hands him her cross pendant. Peter understands her need for a prayer, assuring her of God's presence. He is so engrossed in the moment that he doesn't hear Harrington approaching. Caught off guard, Peter is forced to drop his knife and step away from the girl to avoid being shot. The girl dies just as Peter leaves her, and in a fit of rage, he turns on Harrington, using the cross as a makeshift weapon to kill him. At that moment, Knowles appears, but Peter quickly seizes Harrington's gun and shoots him as well. Knowles tries to reason with Peter, suggesting that someone capable of killing a crocodile could find a place in Fassel's ranks. However, Peter denounces him as the worst kind and leaves him to die. As Fassel approaches, guided by the barking of his dogs, Peter decides to take cover in the cotton fields. When a dog comes too close, he shoots it, further fueling Fassel's determination to capture him. The following morning, Peter arrives at a beach strewn with the corpses of white men who died fighting against Lincoln's forces. Unfortunately, they have no provisions for Peter to take, but in the distance, he can see the ships and hear the cannons signaling that Lincoln's troops are nearby. Excited by the prospect of finally attaining freedom, Peter resumes running, only to be suddenly knocked to the ground by Fassel on horseback. Fassel taunts Peter, offering him a piece of meat he had requested in the cage and demands that he beg. When Peter refuses, Fassel points his gun at him, proclaiming himself as Peter's god. Before Fassel can pull the trigger, however, someone else shoots him first. As Fassel falls, Peter declares that he is no god and turns to see his rescuers, members of Lincoln's native guard, led by Lieutenant Caillou. Peter's body succumbs to exhaustion and hunger, so the soldiers take him to their infirmary tent at their camp in Baton Rouge. Peter's infected leg wound requires treatment, so the nurse, a nun, insists that he rest and recuperate. Over the next few days, Peter dreams of reuniting with his family. Once he is feeling better, he goes to obtain his new papers as a free man, providing some fabricated information, such as his age. However, he is not permitted to leave in search for his family just yet. The white soldiers exploit the fact that the slaves are technically considered stolen contraband and give them two options: work on federal farms or join the army. Initially, Peter refuses to follow orders, but when a soldier explains that joining the army could help him save his family and achieve true freedom, Peter reluctantly agrees. He later discovers that Gordon has also been found injured but alive. Although happy to see his friend, Peter is pained to tell him about John's fate. Peter then meets Caillou to receive his uniform, but first, he is asked if he would be willing to participate in a photograph to support the cause. Caillou assures Peter that the white photographers have good intentions. It turns out that these men are documenting the harsh reality of slavery to inform the world. Peter agrees to pose with his bare back exposed, revealing the scars from countless whippings. It is then taken to see the general, who questions him about any information he may have regarding the enemy's railroad construction. After Peter shares all the intel he possesses, the general scrutinizes his photograph, commenting that the scars signify disobedience, an undesirable trait for a soldier. Caillou attempts to intervene, but Peter defends himself, arguing that his scars represent his resilience in the face of continuous beatings, an important quality for a soldier. At dawn, Caillou leads Peter and the other soldiers to the trenches, delivering an impassioned speech about fighting for freedom. Many soldiers fall to enemy fire while marching, but the group remains undeterred and bravely joins the battle. Fire soon surrounds them, and Peter is briefly knocked unconscious by an explosion. When he awakens, he drags his injured body through the mud, shooting at the enemy when possible and offering prayers for his dying comrades he encounters along the way. Caillou ultimately falls in battle, and Peter later discovers a wounded Gordon as well. Seeing his friend in such pain and fear motivates Peter to leave his hiding spot and charge towards enemy lines. Aiming to stop the cannons, Peter inspires other soldiers to follow him, and the native guard ultimately overpowers their adversaries, securing a hard-won victory. With the war over, the army visits every plantation to liberate the slaves. When they arrive at the plantation where Peter once worked, the slaves are initially shocked and disbelieving, but their disbelief soon transforms into joy as they realize freedom is truly theirs. After witnessing his former master meet a just end, Peter frantically searches for his family, nearly succumbing to despair when he cannot locate them. However, while murmuring a prayer, He glances to his side and allows divine guidance to lead him to his wife and children. They rush to embrace him, reuniting at last. The photograph of Peter, scars and all, becomes an iconic symbol of the fight against slavery and is circulated worldwide. Lincoln's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation enables over 400,000 black individuals to escape to freedom. By 1865, nearly 4 million slaves in America are recognized as free. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay on top of all the latest recaps and never miss a beat. Thank you for watching.